All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're very excited to be here with all of you tonight to celebrate micro activism, how you can make a difference in the world without a bullhorn, or with one if you need one. But we are joined by the author, Omkari L. Williams, who is here in conversation with Britni Louise. So I'm going to introduce Britni first. Britni Louise is a musician, community organizer, and doula from PG County, Maryland. She graduated from, I had to ask what PG stood for. She graduated from Spelman College in 2017 and has since dedicated her life to both art and activism. Britni's music serves as a medium for connection and storytelling, while her work as a community organizer amplifies marginalized voices and focuses on shifting immediate material conditions while fighting for structural change. As a doula, she provides invaluable support to expectant parents during childbirth. Currently, she is based in Atlanta, where she holds the position of organizing and outreach manager at ARC Southeast. And we have some exciting materials over here from ARC Southeast. And if anyone needs Plan B, we also have that. Charis is proud to be an ARC Southeast Plan B outpost all the time, which is a wonderful, wonderful service. And the person of the hour tonight is Omkari L. Williams, who has worked as a political consultant and life coach for 30 years, with an emphasis on supporting activists who identify as introverted or highly sensitive. As a queer Black woman, she shares her own story of challenging injustice to empower others in making a difference in their communities. She leads workshops and trainings and is a host of the popular podcast Stepping into Truth, where she interviews activists from all walks of life. And she can be found at omkariwilliams.com. And I'll drop that link in the chat for folks who are watching virtually. We want to encourage folks who are watching online. You are welcome to ask questions at any time. Just pop them in the chat. When the time comes, I will vocalize them. And for all of you who are physically here with us, I'll bring a mic around to you so that you can ask your questions when the time comes. But for now, we want to sit back, relax, and enjoy this wonderful conversation. So I'm going to kick it over to Britni. Britni, will you pull your mic just a little bit closer to you, and then we'll be all set. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Okay, let's get started.
Let's do it.
Omkari, I'm so happy to be talking with you tonight. Super excited. First and foremost, I want to get into a little bit about yourself. Give me your origin story, if you will, a little bit of that. And then if you want, you can talk us through how we arrived at Micro Activism, the book.
Absolutely. So my story basically is I grew up with a father who was a diplomat and a humanitarian. So I grew up, when I was little, he was resettling Vietnamese refugees in the United States. And then he wound up doing other work, which involved places like Sudan and Rwanda during the genocide and Bosnia during the war there. So I always had this understanding that I had grown up with all of its dysfunction in a really rarefied place. I'd grown up in a place that was not at war, and that was something that you couldn't say about much of the world. And so I was the kid who trick-or-treated for UNICEF, and did things like that. And then started doing political theater and a whole bunch of stuff like that. I did theater for a long time. I was an actor for a long time. And then I thought, this is not quite cutting it. This is not making the difference that I wanted it to make. And so I went into political consulting. This work is my penance for that. I'm hoping it keeps me out of hell. We'll see. And at some point, I just thought, there's got to be a different way. There's got to be a way that feels more like normal humans can make a difference. Because normal humans are not going to go out and change their lives and leave their families and their pets and their friends and take this work on all the time. And so I started thinking also about, even though I am really comfortable speaking to people, I am a deeply introverted person. Left to my own devices, as I was saying to ER, I barely noticed the pandemic for the first year and a half. My life had barely changed. When it came to doing this tour, I thought, oh, I'm going to have to buy some clothing. I don't actually have anything to wear. So someone approached me about, I don't know, a year and a half ago now and said, would you be interested in writing a book on the work that you teach online? And I thought, yeah, sure. Why not give it a shot? And I asked her to give me 6 months to write the proposal. And she said, no problem. And about 2 weeks later, I thought, I should make some notes before I just let this fall off my plate entirely. And I sat down, and 2 weeks later, the entire proposal was done. And at that point, what I realized was this was so much part of me. I'd been living this work for such a long time that it was right there. I didn't have to dredge it from the depths of my soul. I knew what I wanted to say. And what I wanted to say is that everyone has a contribution to make, and that we need everyone's contribution, and that I don't care how seemingly insignificant what you have to do is. Without that piece, the whole thing falls apart. So I really wanted to encourage people to find their voice, not the voice that we're, in this go big or go home society in which we live. You're kind of shamed if you're doing something small. It's like, you should be out there doing this. You should be out there doing that. Oh, really? Says who? So that's me in a sort of a nutshell. I am a feisty little introvert who's going to stand up for people who want to do something and don't necessarily have the temperament to do the things that we are told we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to hear about your cause, if you will.
So I have a role. It's called the Noah's Ark role. I did not go to church as a child, but I liked the Noah's Ark story. So I'm like, okay, this works. My rule is that you should pick one or at most two things to focus on, because we all have limited energy and resources and capacity. And when you start going beyond one or two, you're really spreading yourself too thin to make an impact, especially when it's not your full-time job, even if it were your full-time job. And so my two things vary. Well, one of them never varies, and that's democracy, because without democracy, everything else is moot. No democracy, no voting, no choice, no nothing. And then my next cause is reproductive rights, reproductive justice. But that kind of sometimes gets pushed to the side. When we were throwing babies in cages at the southern border, that pushed that aside for a little while. But then I came back to it once people were in place and systems were in place to start addressing that. Right now, the situation in Gaza is front of mind for me. I have so many friends who work with refugees. And as I said, that was my dad's work. It's my brother's work now, currently. And so right now I'm just trying to do what I can to push for a ceasefire so that people can get out. I mean, the situation has so many different layers, but right now it's like, can we please save some lives? Can we please stop having bombs dropping on babies and pregnant women and pregnant people and hospitals and the elderly? Can we please stop and let the two governments duke it out? Let the Israeli government and Hamas duke it out on their own. Please leave the innocents on both sides of this alone. So that's something that's really present for me. Just before I came here tonight, I got an email from a friend who has a friend who's a relief worker in Gaza, and they haven't heard from him in 3 days. And she says, I don't know if I should be referring to him in the past tense. And I said, so for right now, we're going to keep hope alive. That's what we're going to do. And if that changes, then we'll deal with it when that happens. But so for me right now, it's democracy, because that supports everything else. And it's the situation in Gaza. Those are the things I'm really focused on at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like inside of what you were saying, about shifting your focus temporarily, having to kind of move one thing out of a space to give room to another, even inside of the immigration issues and the conflict the genocide that's happening in Gaza currently, your interests that you spoke about are still deeply rooted in reproductive justice, are still,
Oh yeah,
safe and sustainable communities, bodily autonomy. It's all in there.
everything is. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
I think the thing we forget is being human doesn't have walls around it.
Yeah.
We're these permeable things, and the people we're around and the experiences that we hear about impact us all in different ways. And when we think that, oh, that has nothing to do with me, we are so wrong. We are so wrong. There is nothing that has nothing to do with someone else. You may be a few degrees of separation remote from it at this moment, but that could change. You never know when that could change. And so I think that expanding our critical thinking capacities so that we can actually say, well, what are the intersections here? How is this affecting people in this particular way? That doing that really, really matters. And that when we are encouraged to kind of dumb it down, that's just supporting the status quo. And so we really need to push back against that. We really need to be curious. We need to say to people with whom we disagree, tell me more, from a really respectful place. I'm not saying, shine people on. I'm saying if we want to address the problems that we are confronting, we need to know why people come at it from different points of view. Because otherwise there's no place to meet. There's no accommodation to be made. None of us is going to get 100% of what we want. And I think that sort of purist pragmatist thing is really important to address, because if you're a purist, then you're basically saying that everyone needs to think exactly what you think and feel exactly how you feel. And if they don't, that there's something fundamentally wrong with them. And I'm not talking about hate speech, and I'm just talking about people who legitimately see things differently than we do. If you can't tolerate a conversation with someone who sees something differently, then you're not in a community, you're in a cult. And we don't need more cults. This is how we get to the place we've gotten to in the world right now.
Yeah.
So I just think it's really important to do our own personal inquiry, and also to be super careful about being curious and learning more and not making assumptions.
Absolutely. As you're talking and as I was reading the book, I was just like, this is so many lessons, so many salient points. And I want to know how you arrived. Like, what were your learning experiences across your 30 years that allowed you to be able to write all this down step by step?
Well, it's actually really across my whole life. I think what's happened over the last 30 years is I've had enough conversations with different people that certain things just keep coming up, and I'm like, oh yeah, that comes up again and again. Do take a note of that. Don't let that just go by. So I thought about the things that come up all the time. I thought about the questions people ask me over and over. I thought about the ideas we have in this society about what constitutes making a contribution and how completely screwed up that is. We have this idea that's so big. The analogy I often use is this: there's no sane person who would not like to fix the problem of world hunger. There just isn't. Everyone, if you could do that, it'd be done, right? Not going to happen overnight. But doesn't it matter if you feed one person? It certainly matters to the person you just fed. And to be able to scale down our expectations and to scale down our idea of what counts is incredibly important. Because if we don't understand that it counts, we won't do it. We'll just we'll watch Netflix. And I got nothing against Netflix. I'm good for a couple of episodes of The Diplomat, trust me. I'm like, yeah, I'm good at that. But that's sort of my recharge space, not my checkout space. And we get to do both, but we should know what we're doing. And checking out is legit, but you should know that you're doing it so you can pull yourself back in. All right. So you don't just stay checked out, which is what is happening a lot in the world right now, is people are just staying checked out because they're so overwhelmed. The other reason for pick two things. So your brain does not explode, because who's going to clean up that mess? And it's just really, it's really disheartening right now. It really is. I'm not going to lie. It feels very dark and very heavy. And I think it's times like these, it's even more important to do the things we can do, whatever we are called to do.
For sure. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Have some
Trying
water.
not to cough in the. I'm okay.
Okay.
So you talked about your interview series that you've done with activists. I would love to hear about some of the highlights. I guess some of the stories that have kind of changed you a little bit. Stories that have different.
Yeah. Well, you haven't yet met one of the people I profiled in the book, but you two are on the board of the same organization. My friend Coco. Coco is amazing. She is a cisgender white woman who could easily sit home and do nothing, because she walks through the world with a fair amount of privilege. And instead, she spends her time advocating in various ways for people who really need it. I mean, one of the things that Coco's really interested in is getting rid of cash bail so that people are not sitting in jail for crimes they have not yet been convicted of, and losing their homes and disconnecting from their families and all of the things that go with that, as well as ARC and reproductive justice. But Coco believes that because she has so much privilege, that she's in a unique position to exercise that. And so she does. And she's honestly, she's one of my idols. She really, truly is. I just, like, if everyone were like Coco, this world would be paradise. And yet I don't need everybody to be like Coco, but I need people to know that people like Coco exist so that they can be inspired to do the thing that they can do. And then I have another friend who is very introverted and would probably rather sit home with a sharp object in her eye than go on a march. And I'm not sure I'm exaggerating about that. And so what she does is she writes postcards to voters around the country. And she's a really talented artist. And so she makes them pretty. So you get this postcard in the mail from some rando, and you're thinking, what's this? And you turn it over and it says, there's an election coming up in your town on this date. And it doesn't tell you who to vote for. It just tells you what the election is for. But it's a reminder, and it's such a cute reminder that you're probably going to stick it on your fridge and remember to go vote in that election. And she's been doing this for years. And in elections where 20 votes makes the difference, I don't know how many elections she's won, but she might have won some, right? I don't know. But she gets people engaged. And I think that that really matters. So you can be Coco or you can be Lisa, and and there's this whole spectrum in the middle of what people can do, and it's totally up to you. It doesn't have to look like what I do. It doesn't have to look like what Britni does. It doesn't have to look like anybody else. It just has to be the thing that you can do and that you will do consistently. And I think that's the most important thing. She was fine. She was fine when she got here. It's like,
no, it's gonna take 1 second.
So while she's taking a second, I will say that one of the things that I did in writing this book is I really focused on what are the different kinds of people who get involved in activism. And I have my 4 activist archetypes. And the archetypes are the headliner, the producer, the organizer, and the indispensable. And they basically came out of my work in the film industry, because if you work on a film, you've got your star, which is the headliner. You've got the producer, which is still the producer. You've got the organizer, who's likely going to be someone who's running some particular department. My personal favorite is craft services, which translates as food. And then you have the indispensables, and they are essentially the background actors. So unless you're doing a movie with two people, like My Dinner with Andre, which you probably haven't seen but should, because it's a really good movie, you've never seen a movie with only two people. If there aren't people in the background, that just looks weird, right? So I thought, okay, so there are parallels. The headliner is the person like me who's willing to stand up here and have focus on them and talk about stuff. The producer looks at the whole project and says, what needs to be done, who's going to do it, and let me farm out the different things. The organizer, in this case, the food craft services person, says, let's make sure that there is coffee all day long, because without coffee, there is no movie. Let's make sure that there is food all day long, because without food, there is no movie. You know, and then you have the background people who make it look like a real place. And everyone matters. You take any of those elements out and the whole thing collapses on itself. And I think of organizing exactly the same way. There are different roles for everyone, and no one role is actually more important than the other. I mean, people say, oh, well, you know, Dr. King. But if there hadn't been all those people on the mall in front of him, he'd have been a tourist at the Lincoln Memorial. Nobody would have noticed. Nobody would have cared. Same with Greta Thunberg. If she hadn't had all those millions of people sitting on strike at their schools around the world, she'd have been a kid sitting outside the Swedish parliament freezing. I mean, it's, you know, everyone has a role, and it doesn't have to be glamorous. It's, what can you do? What do you like doing? What are you good at doing? And what will you do over and over and over again, even when some days it feels like you are spitting in the wind? Because there are going to be those days. There are going to be those days where you just think, wow, this was bad. And then you have to get up and start again another, you know, maybe you give yourself a day off, but you have to get up and start again. Because if you don't, who's gonna?
Okay, on that note, let's talk self-care. Right, yeah.
Self-care is not Gwyneth Paltrow and $400 bottles of goop. Literally goop. Who does that? I don't even understand that. But when I talk about self-care, what I'm really talking about are, what are the practices in your life that build resilience? What are the practices in your life that allow you to continue the work when it gets hard? Now, let's be clear, full disclosure, I have never and never will say no to a pedicure in my life. Will never happen. But that is not my essential self-care. My essential self-care is actually lying on my couch with a book, or my knitting project, or, you know, Netflix, because I just need my brain to quiet down. That is my self-care. Or taking a really long walk, or, you know, just stretching on the floor in my living room. Whatever I need to do, but it's not about spending money. It's not about buying anything. It's not about looking a certain way. It's about resourcing my emotional system so that I can keep doing work that is hard work to do. That's what self-care looks like. So it's going to look different for everyone, but it is not about what it's become, which is this commodified thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have to be rich to do it, that is not self-care. That's capitalism. No, that's not how it works.
Say that again, yeah.
Seriously, it's just like, ugh.
Yeah.
It's kind of gross that we even take nurturance, self-nurturance, and nurturance of others and try and turn it into a product.
Yeah.
No, that's not right. So self-care also can look like helping a friend out, right? Mutual aid is self-care because it builds resilient communities. I mean, we saw during the pandemic where the holes were, and they were vast and gaping holes. And if we'd thought about it for 5 minutes ahead of time, we could have seen them coming. I mean, my friend had a daughter at the time who was 5 and had just started school. And all of a sudden, she's out of school and she's an only kid. And she lost so much socialization. We could have predicted that. And we should have had a plan for what happens if it's not like it was the first pandemic ever,
Right.
right? You know, this had happened before. We did not have a plan. And that's just arrogance on our part.
Yeah.
We're so sure that we've got it all together. Hello, have you met humans? No. So I think now one lesson to take from that is, how do we build resilient communities? So part of that is resilient individuals, but then part of it is have a conversation with the people in your community so that you can start thinking about, well, if we had another pandemic, which is actually more likely than not, how do we want to do it differently? And if we were to have another pandemic, maybe those essential workers should make a little more money, just, and just taking things to their logical conclusion, exploring the nuance, and just making a conscious choice to say, this is how we're going to do this differently. Doesn't mean we're not going to make mistakes. We are, because that's just part of the process. But we don't have to make the same dumb mistakes we made the last time. Let's make better mistakes. Let's make smarter mistakes. And let's make them in better community rather than individuals hoarding toilet paper. I mean, anyway, moving on.
Right.
Yeah.
So on the topic of community, you talk a lot about finding your people, finding the right people. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Sometimes I think people think when I say find your people, I mean people who think exactly the way you do, but I don't. I mean, I think people who share your values and may have a very different thing that they're interested in, a very different thing that they care about, but they share your value of making sure that people are resourced and people have what they need. So then it's like, oh, okay, so that is a community, that is a group of people. How do we make sure that in a crisis, we're filling the gaps, we're filling the different roles that need to be filled? And the more we know each other ahead of time, the easier that is to do, because we can say, oh, this person over here is brilliant at that, so let's ask her to do this particular job. And this person over here, they're just amazing at repairing anything. So maybe they could be the person in charge of keeping things running. I mean, whatever. But if you're already in community, then when it all goes pear-shaped, you have a better opportunity of moving through whatever the crisis is with some degree of equanimity, some degree of power, as opposed to being in a panicked state because you don't know what's happening and you don't know how to respond. So planning ahead is good as much as we can. I mean, I'm not going to say go get obsessive about it, because I don't actually think that helps either. But having some game plan in mind so that you can say, okay, I have the basics down, so I'm not going to be panic stricken the next time a crisis comes around. And we're better informed now. We can make much better decisions. We just can't do it by ourselves. And I think we really need to pay attention to that. We cannot do this by ourselves. So let's pay attention and see where we can fill in the gaps.
Right. And paying attention not only to your surroundings, but also in being able to tap different people, you have to know who those people are. You have to get to know them first before you can even identify those skills and things.
Exactly. I mean, this is a crisis is not when you want to have to start finding those
Right.
people. You know, you want to have those people in your community. I live in a little town in Western Massachusetts, and within the sort of there's like 8 houses around us. We know what to do in a crisis, and we know which of the 8 of us is going to be able to respond to which different things. I mean, maybe we haven't got it all covered, but we've got a lot of it covered. And we absolutely know that we can rely on those 8 people, or it's actually more than that. It's 8 houses, it's like 15 people. We know that we can rely on each other for things we might need that someone doesn't have. So we would never have to go out and buy a hammer, right?
Yeah.
Someone has a hammer. We know who has a hammer. We wouldn't have to go out and figure out. One of our neighbors has a garden and has all of this, has a cold storage center in his basement. So we have all of these things, and another one likes to pickle. So there's all these pickled food. I mean, we have all of these things that are in place. It wouldn't cover everything, but we would be together and we would be able to figure things out a lot better than having to dive inside your own brain and try and navigate all of the challenges by yourself, because that you're already in a heightened state of anxiety. That is not when any of us do our best thinking. So as much as we can communicate and build structure and build community and build relationship ahead of time, the better off we're going to be.
Very well said. I want to talk a little bit now about, I guess, self-assessment and how you are able to discern good work that is rooted in your values versus maybe like saviorism or even the opposite. Even when you think I think you framed it as deep work versus shallow work.
Mm-hmm.
Can you get into that a little bit?
Sure. Okay, so this is probably going to get me in a little bit of trouble with some people, but I'm going there anyway. So after George Floyd was murdered, people were in the streets by the millions around the world, and that was so good to see. And now, if you work in DEI, good luck getting hired. Good luck. Can't get a job. Right after George Floyd, you had more work than you could possibly do. And now, not so much. I'm doing a keynote at a place that shall go nameless for their DEI department while I'm on this tour. And they said, so we don't really like the word activism. Like, have you seen the book? They said, could you maybe refer to it as change making? It's like, okay. And that's disturbing. That's disturbing because that to me feels like, oh, we don't want to, we kind of want to go, we want to say we've done the thing, but we don't want to actually have to do the thing. Also, seriously, activism comes from the same root as the word action. What is your issue here? I mean, it's not a bad word. It's kindergartners are allowed to say it. What is your problem here? But being a pragmatist, not a purist, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to these people because they're really nice people. They really are. They're lovely, the ones I've met so far. And I'm going to say the problem you have with the word is not about the word. It's that you've decided it means something it doesn't mean. You've let it be co-opted to mean something it doesn't mean. And that's not a good thing. We need to be careful. Language matters. Words matter. Activism is not throwing rocks through a window. That's vandalism. They end in an ism, but they're not the same. And so I think it's really important with deep work and shallow work. Shallow work is work that looks good on the surface, but doesn't actually advance anything. So, yes, it was really important that all those people were in the streets after George Floyd was murdered because it elevated a conversation. But if you don't then go to the next level and do the work of dismantling the structures that allow something like George Floyd's murder to happen the way it happened, then it was kind of performative. And it's hard to stay in the game. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to do deep work because deep work really works well for a lot of people. That's why these systems have maintained for so long, is they work well for people. Back in 2016, I was living in Savannah, and a friend of ours had invited us to a Girl Scout event. He was oh my God, he was such a wonderful older man, and he was really rich. His family had the house he lived in used to be his family's plantation. But back in the 60s and 70s, he was driving around in a VW bus working for Planned Parenthood. I'm sure his family just wanted to disown him, but he was the only male, and I was like, we're just going to pretend that he's doing something else, basically. And he was fantastic. And he invited us to this Girl Scout thing. And if you don't know, the Girl Scouts were founded in Savannah, so it's a big deal down there, right? And I'm sitting on the bus. Oh my God. And it's 2 weeks before the election. And there's this woman, this Southern woman, and she sits there and she's saying to her friend, ABC, anybody but Clinton. And I thought, do not turn around. Do not say anything. Sit still. Do not get arrested tonight. And when I was thinking about it, I thought, her life relies on a certain kind of structure. She didn't work. She was totally dependent on her husband. She had a life that really benefited from her being in this particular realm. So no, she wasn't going to feel like she needed to stand up for women, or she needed to stand up for people who were in any way being oppressed by the system, because it was working for her. And it was an important thing for me to really sort of wrap my head around, was if we're going to make structural change, we have to find a way in. And often that way in involves working with people with whom you would not normally want to be associated. I mean, I know someone, I had interviewed her for my podcast. She's very, very progressively inclined. You would say radical for sure. She would say radical, less so now. She's more pragmatic now. But she wound up working with Newt Gingrich on a project. I was like, you mean like Newt Gingrich? Newt Gingrich? I mean, my brain was having such a hard time wrapping itself around it. But she was really interested in what's called the First Step Project, which got a lot of people out of jail for low-level drug offenses. And so was Newt Gingrich, for very different reasons. She was coming from this is complete BS, and why are people being incarcerated, mostly people of color, for nonviolent crimes? Why are we doing this? Newt Gingrich was coming at it from the Christian second chance perspective. And they were like, all right, well, whatever.
We got to get him out. Yeah.
It's like, if this will help, I'm not going to say, no, I'm not going to do this with you because you're Newt Gingrich and, ick. And so they successfully got like 30,000 people released from prison. Who cares if it was Newt Gingrich? That's when you say, fine, we don't have to agree on everything. We agree on this. We can work together on this. And then we'll go from there. We don't have to be in lockstep on everything. As I said, not a cult. In this case, they were a community working towards that one goal. Much healthier, much healthier. And it worked for people. People got to go home. And I mean, it would be a little hard, but I would do it if that was the end result, because the end result matters more than feeling like, well, I would never work with Newt Gingrich, you know, like, yeah, right. That's not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something I'm still grappling with myself.
Oh, it's so hard.
I am okay. I am good there. Yeah.
You're safe though, because there's like no chance that, say, Lindsey Graham is ever going to come over to the right side of things. So you're good.
I'm all set.
You're good.
All set.
Mm-hmm.
Reproductive test is a very
Yeah, he ain't coming over, so
yeah.
we're good.
I wanna let me just check. ER, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, about 5 more minutes.
Ooh, okay, great. So yeah, this is a good place to wrap up. When I was reading, the place that really punched me in the chest was that radical realism. I said, "Oh my goodness, were you talking to me personally? Can you please speak to that?"
I was. I didn't know you then, but yes, I was. Radical realism has a lot to do with, you know, purism versus pragmatism, but it's not only about being realistic about what you're doing, it's about being realistic about how you're doing it and what your capacity is, and trying to stay in the game over the long haul, and also recognizing I have a nephew who is 10 months old. He is not going to be alive to see the end of all of the causes that I care about coming to fruition. It's not going to happen. 10 months old. And we live a long time in my family. My grandmother was 102. And still, when he is 102, there will still be things we are still fighting for that we are fighting for now. Radical realism means you look at moving the ball forward. You don't measure success by getting to the finish line, because that is not going to happen in our lifetimes. And that does not give you license to quit. Nope. But you have to be clear, because if you don't set your expectations appropriately, it's heartbreaking. And if it's heartbreaking, you will stop. You will. We're human. We're not going to keep breaking our hearts over and over and over again. So instead, you say, okay, I see the big goal. Let me move this needle here, and keep going and keep going and keep passing it on, and really pass this on. I mean, I'm hoping that my next book is going to be for people who are in elementary school, because older than that, they can read this one. But I want to do a book for little kids, because frankly, they're the ones who are going to be carrying on the work. And also they have such a beautiful sense of justice. Let's nurture that. And let's learn from that for ourselves, so that we do keep doing the work, so that we don't just say, I can't, and check out. Tempting, but not acceptable. It is not okay to quit. It's just not. Quitting is
the privilege we don't have.
It's the privilege we don't have, and it's putting a burden on other people to pick up the work. And everyone needs to do something. If everyone did something, I mean, it's like if everyone, I'm from Manhattan when it was really dirty. Not like it's clean now, but it was really dirty. And I would think if everyone would just pick up one piece of trash, it would be pristine. And it's like that. Just pick up your one piece of trash. Do your one tiny thing. Feed your one person. Send your one email. Text your one person about a ceasefire in Gaza. Do the one little tiny thing. You know, speak up for the innocents across the board. Speak up for the innocents. And speak up for people having rights and for democracy. I mean, it's not like democracy is perfect, but as they say, it is the best system we've got. And we are, so I bought a whole bunch of books with me for my nephews. So I had no room for a book for me for this book tour. And I could not wait to unload the books on my brother. I was like, here, good, now I can buy a book. And I bought Rachel Maddow's new book, Prequel, which is about how close we are to losing democracy. And I think we need to be paying more attention to that, because no democracy, no voting. No democracy, no change in environmental rights, no change in reproductive rights, no change in anything. So whatever your cause is, understand that that democracy is the foundational thing. And you can still do, your two things, but just keep an eye on that, because it's really important, because we are on the precipice. We are on, stupid Speaker of the House. What a moron. I mean, my God, we are on the precipice, and we just can't. If we're going to go down, let's go down with a massive fight. Let's make them pay hard if they're going to take us down. And personally, I am, nope, not happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Y'all heard her.
So we have a question from our virtual audience to start us off, and then I'll bring the mic around to who's here with us who would like to ask a question. So Yolanda Brown says, I noticed that humans like to try to recreate the wheel. What is one tip for using what we have in regards to systems and processes in the activist biosphere? I ask because I see multiple entities addressing the same or similar concerns, but just a few collaborating to address the concerns holistically or serving the gap. Thank you for the insights offered.
That whole reinventing the wheel thing, I honestly think it's one of the symptoms of what's wrong with our society, is that we feel like we have to be unique. We don't feel like we're members of a community in that way, because if you are, then you don't feel the need to be the special one in the same way. You don't feel the need to be the one who came up with the idea. You're like, oh, cool. Susie over there came up with the idea, and that works for me. And so I think that it's really honestly about checking your ego. If you're trying to reinvent the wheel, why is that? Is it because your way is actually better, in which case you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to maybe sand the edges off so it rolls a little more smoothly. But otherwise, is it just about your ego? And if it's just about your ego, there's a lot of support in our society for that. But it's not helpful in terms of actually creating a world where people live in dignity. And that, let me just say that I used to think a lot about just, DEI. I actually have never liked the word inclusivity, because it still implies ownership. You are including someone in your space. I've never liked that word. And the word I've come to is dignity. We want people to be able to live lives of dignity. We want that for ourselves. So rather than reinvent the wheel, think about advancing dignity. How do I move us a little forward on the dignity scale? Because there are people doing that work all the time, every day. And so we don't need to be special. We just need to be part of a larger vision and take joy in that and understand how valuable our contributions actually are. I mean, if you have a 1,000-piece puzzle and there's someone holding 2 pieces of the puzzle, it's only 2 pieces, but the puzzle's never going to be done without them. So.
Anybody in our physical room want to ask a question?
So you spoke on it some, but could you speak more about how to know, to not start engaging with someone or to stop engaging with someone that you disagree with?
It's not about the disagreement. It's about how is the disagreement being engaged with. My favorite 3 words are tell me more, right? So tell me more about why you feel like that. Tell me more about your understanding. Tell me more about how you came to feel this way about X, Y, or Z. I'll listen to pretty much anyone who is an honest conversational broker. But if it's someone who's just like, well, I hate the gays or I hate the whomevers, oh hell no. I am walking away from that. That is not what I am here for, and no one should be, because that's just abuse. But a difference of opinion is different than that, right? That's someone saying, I mean, it's Newt Gingrich and my friend Nisha. It's like, okay, so we agree on this one thing. Okay. And, peace out. Maybe we'll come back together some other time on something else. Who knows? You could improve, Newt. It's possible. I mean, you never know. But draw the line at what you know in your heart is abuse. Do not sit for that. Walk away from that. That's not okay. That's the distinction I draw.
One of the questions, because we're booksellers and we think about where books go together physically on a shelf, but also sort of spiritually. And so I always like to know from authors, who are your sort of spiritual bookshelf mates? Who do you hope people think of when they think of your book in relation to others? Or who are your sort of book ancestors, if that's an easier way to think about it?
Okay, so my friend Layla Saad, who wrote the book Me and White Supremacy, Layla she's like my sister. We love each other so much, and we have had so many conversations over the years before she wrote the book, and we go back a ways. So Layla, and just the way she thinks about the world. So even if you haven't read her book, following her on Instagram, you get a lot of wisdom, especially because Layla doesn't live in the United States. So she has a different perspective than we do here. So she's certainly one of them. James Baldwin, oh my God. I mean, just anything. He was if I could sit down to dinner with one person, it would be James Baldwin, because his insight was so acute. And again, he didn't live here. And I actually think that creates a space of freedom that people can move within, so that they have the perspective to see more clearly what is happening here. And they're not constantly engaged in the emotional fight, so they have the capacity to express it more fully. So so those two people, I'm rereading James Baldwin right now. Well, not right now, because only one book on the tour. But I was before I left, and I will when I get home. But James Baldwin, who, if you don't know, he not only was he a Black man, he was a gay Black man. So he left and went to Paris and lived in Paris for much of his life, because there he was free enough to write about the things he wanted to write, because he wasn't in this struggle every single day. So, yeah. And then, people think about Dr. King, and I think they often miss the complexity of him and sort of put him on a pedestal. Don't do that. He was a human. Read what he had to say, and read how radical it was for the time. People talk about him as this great peacemaker, which he was, but it wasn't that simple. I mean, the FBI had a file on him that was, like the old, well, I was going to say phone book, but none of you know what I'm talking about. A phone book used to be like this thick. So, and, he was at one point the most hated man in America, because he was pushing a radical idea of justice. So go back. I mean, I'm kind of on purpose picking some of the elders, because I think that their unique position in the world at the time that they were in the world matters and has a lot to teach us about how to do this work. So I would encourage you to read James Baldwin. I would encourage you to read Dr. King. Actually read him, not just listen to the, pull the quotes. Read this letter from a Birmingham jail. Do that. Start there.
There's a great edited volume called The Radical King, which I think contextualizes him in the way that you're talking
Oh,
about.
sorry about that.
No. Britni, we want to kind of give you the last word. If there's any kind of summation you want to offer before we break.
Any summation? First of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you for this work. Thank you for coming and talking with me today. This has been fantastic. And for folks who are listening, folks who have read the book, who have yet to read the book, it's real. It's true. Everything in here. I work at Arc Southeast, which is an abortion fund, and every day, literally yesterday, we're having the same conversations, having the conversation of, okay, well, we want to do 10 things. How can we? And the answer is we cannot. You know what I'm saying? So you have to definitely get your focus, figure out what you want to be focused on, and give that as much as you have to give. It's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Our community is where we should lean. You know what I'm saying? We're going to be all right.
Yeah, it's so true. Lean on each other. Don't let the noise divide you, right?
Yeah.
Don't let it, because that is the way to failure. Just dig your heels in, be feisty on that subject. Don't let people deter you from doing what you know is right, even when it's a little bit scary. No one has ever died of discomfort, ever. And yet we're taught to avoid it like the plague. Don't do that. Be willing to be uncomfortable. Sometimes actually lean into the discomfort and see where it takes you on the other end.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. So for our friends who are watching at home, you can click the teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy Micro Activism, How You Can Make a Difference in the World Without a Bullhorn, directly from Charis Books and More. Just click that teal button. We really do appreciate you. It really does help us when you buy your event books from us. So thank you for being with us tonight. We're going to go ahead and say goodnight to you.